Good morning. I'm Pam Schumann, and I'm the worship associate for today here at Horizon. We're excited to welcome you to our worship service this morning. We're so glad you're with us today, whether you're joining us in person or virtually, whether you're here for the first time or whether you've been here for longer than you can remember. Here at Horizon, we welcome people of all faiths and of no faith in particular. Whoever you are, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome among us. I have a few announcements and one special one coming up, but you'll find a lot of announcements in your order of service and the inserts and in the order of service itself. The first announcement has to do with Art on the Horizon, all our lovely artwork that we have here this time. There'll be a reception for the Visual Arts Guild of Frisco Artists. They'll be in Fellowship Hall after the worship service. Please come and visit with them. It's an opportunity to meet them and thank them for exhibiting their art in our sanctuary. Some of the artists will have prints of their work for you to see at the reception. Another announcement is that for anyone who might be interested in choir, we always are interested in having people join our choir. This week, and this week only, we're meeting tomorrow, Monday, at 7:30 in Fellowship Hall. But most of the time we meet on Thursdays at 7:30. So please join us if you like to sing or want to try it out. And then we have another announcement from our board president and Daniel Polk and Carolyn Moore, our board president, will announce this next important news.
So I'm up here again, my favorite thing to do. As you may know, in past years, the Horizon Board has applied for and been awarded INTUC grants for various things such as security equipment, the community garden, our previous minister search, stuff like that. In September this last year, we applied for a grant totaling $17,500 to fund our ministerial search and pay for some needed AV equipment. So I'm happy to announce that the INTUC Endowment Committee has now funded that grant. We'll be able to fund our search with $15,000 as budgeted by the MSC and use the $2,500 to replace some old AV equipment and purchase some new so that we can continue our mission to welcome radically and to modernize the way we do church. So I want to thank you all.
Here it is from North Texas Unitarian Universalist congregations. We look forward to seeing what you can do with this.
After that wonderful news, I have the call to worship, which today comes from Reverend Michael Tino. They write, "We gather this morning to honor the days about to come, the days of growth, when the earth will wake up and send forth its abundance. In doing so, we need first to wake ourselves up to the winter that is around us, to frozen hearts that lack compassion, to the ice-coated conscience of our nation. We shake ourselves awake and begin our resistance to that which keeps us frozen in fear and helplessness. We come here to celebrate the beginning of a season of growth, understanding that we must plant the seeds of love and warm them in the sun until the garden is ready to grow them. And may we plant these seeds of love together and harvest the fruits as a bounty available for all who are in need."
Our Chalice Lighting words come to us this morning from the writings of the Reverend Kendall Gibbons. She writes, "Blessed be the sacred fire that lives deep within each of us. May we cherish its light. Blessed be all that is contained and enclosed. Blessed be this time of isolation so that we may share health. Blessed be the future that grows protected within the womb. Blessed be the milk that is prepared to nurture new life. Brigid, ancient spirit of the Imbolc season, bless our hearth fires and our homes with warmth and love, and let there be mercy for those who are without. Bless the risk of birth by which life continues. Let there be pity when it goes awry and solace for its losses. Bless the tools of our labor and the transforming heat of the forge. May justice be the anvil on which our days are wrought. Bless the candles that connect us to one another in community. May they remind us that all flame is your flame, that all flame is one, that even when we are separated, we are not alone. And from this flame of light and covenant community, we kindle this chalice of our faith heritage that takes its shape from our prophetic words and wisdom of many traditions. From the human response to mystery and wonder, to reason and compassion, to the infinite abundance of divine creativity and love, and to the unending cycles of renewal and change in nature. May it stand as a beacon to all who seek to know the fullness of life. I invite you now to rise and join with me in saying the words of our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth, thus do we covenant together. I invite you to remain standing and join in singing our opening hymn, Rise Up, O Flame.
Horizon strives to make a difference in our local community by partnering with MetroCrest Services. So if you brought any donations for MetroCrest, would you please pass them to the aisles where a young person will pick them up? So at this time, I would like to invite our young folks up here on the steps for a story.
All right, so today we're going to be recognizing a holiday that I think some of you here might have heard of and others might not be as familiar with, and it's called Imbolc. Can we say that together? Imbolc, yeah. So this is an ancient holiday that comes at the time of year when we're getting kind of tired of the cold of winter, it being icy, and it comes at the time when we're hoping for longer days and the warm weather of spring.
So according to people who lived long ago, Imbolc is the time when seeds, which are buried deep down in the cold and dark ground, begin to dream of spring. These seeds begin making their first tiny movements towards growth, too. Imbolc also marks the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And Imbolc is a holiday dedicated to Bridget, the mother goddess of Ireland. And we have a story to tell you about her.
So, once upon a time, long ago, at the very beginning of time, there was a magic well, which I hope you're seeing up here. And one special day in that long ago time, just as the sun was rising and the sky was just beginning to turn pink, the goddess Bridget slipped into the world and into the hands of 9 sisters. And they were all swaying in a circle, singing around her. And the waters of a magic well bubbled up with joy when Bridget was born.
And Bridget was amazing. If there's not a picture behind me, just picture this. A column of fire rose up out of her head, a fire that burned right up to the sky. Bridget reached up with her hand and broke away a flaming plume from that crown of fire, and she dropped it on the ground before her. There it leapt and shone and became the hearth fire of the house she built beside the magic well. And from that fire of her hearth, she drew out a leaping tongue of flame, if you can imagine that, and then she swallowed it, and the flames burned straight to her heart.
So she was standing there with fire all around her head like a crown, and it coming up from inside her heart, glowing and shooting from her hands, and dancing on the hearth of the fire at her feet. So we have 4 fires that Bridget brought to serve the people of Ireland. So out of the fire on Bridget's hands, the craft of bending iron or making things like swords was born. Out of the fire on the hearth came things like herbal teas and healing remedies. Writing and poetry came out of the fire in her head. And from the fire in Bridget's heart radiated warmth of compassion and caring for other people.
So when people learned about Bridget's fires and the gifts that came from her, they came from miles around to learn the secret of using fire to soften iron and to bend it. The people called this smithcraft, and they used it to make wheels, pots, and tools that did not break. When the people learned of Bridget's healing remedies, they came from miles around to seek her help. She used roots and leaves and tree bark to make medicine to help people feel better.
So people wanted Bridget's recipes for these medicine, but they couldn't because they couldn't remember which plants they needed or how to use them. So they begged her for help. And then the fire on her head kind of glowed really bright. And she took a blackened stick and used it to make marks on a piece of bark, kind of the way we would write. And she said, "These are the talking marks. They are the way to remember what you don't want to forget." So they allowed people to write down all of the wisdom that she had.
And then one day, 2 men with leprosy, which is a skin condition, came to Bridget. "Bathe yourself in my well," said Bridget to the first man. At every place Bridget's waters touched him, the man's sores were healed. Then Bridget said, "Now you must bathe your friend." The man looked at his friend, who was every inch covered in those ugly sores of leprosy. "I cannot bear to touch him," he said. Bridget looked at him with her fiery eyes and said, "Find your compassion." The man was afraid, but he looked deep into his heart. He dipped his hands into Bridget's well and smoothed the waters on his friend's skin, and thus both of them were healed.
So Bridget stayed with the people of Ireland year after year, and every year in the cold of winter, people thanked her for the warm fires of the head and the heart and the hands and the hearth. And they said, "Thank you, Bridget, for all your gifts. May you dwell forever with us in your house by the well." So there's a lot we can learn from the story of Bridget. Most of all, we can ask ourselves, what are the gifts we most need right now? Healing, compassion, creativity, and what can we offer to other people? So Bridget's gifts, like we talked about, healing, creativity, inspiration, they still shine and spark with holy fire and dwell within us today and every day.
So thank you all for listening. We're going to go ahead to class now, and we're going to sing you out.
The month of February will be, our Share the Plate will be on behalf of the Sunrise Movement. And we'd like to welcome Mr. Nathan May to the microphone to explain the Sunrise Movement to us.
Hey y'all, I'm Nathan. It's so good to be here. I'm very grateful to be welcomed back here at Horizon. I have many fond memories here from my childhood. I'm here with my friend.
Hello, I'm Hope.
Also with Sunrise Movement Dallas. And Sunrise Movement is an organization, a youth-led activist organization focused on stopping the climate crisis and creating millions of good jobs in the process. So making sure that we're fighting climate change to protect the planet, but doing so in a way that's equitable and promotes social justice and creates a better world for all of us as we tackle this problem.
Yeah, and I guess I am supposed to share a little bit about why I do climate activism. And I think for a lot of reasons, but mostly climate change is an issue that I think touches every person and place in this world that I love. And I think loving for people means taking care of them in the best way you can. You know, the climate crisis, it affects pretty much every aspect of our lives and society, the food that we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, where we can live, where our kids will be able to grow and play and dream. And it's really scary when you hear the impacts of this issue and what it could mean for people's survival and well-being and a lot of places and animals that we love too. And so when you think of that scariness, it can feel very easy to kind of retreat and to block it out of your mind. But I think what keeps me going in this movement is not only, you know, the fear of what happens if we don't take action, but the hope of what can happen when we do take action. Because while climate change is the biggest existential threat that humanity faces right now, it's also our biggest opportunity, right? Because if we have to change so many aspects of our society, that means that there's opportunity for us to change it for the better, right? We can make our cities more accessible and sustainable. We can make sure that everyone has access to clean air and water and food and shelter. We can restore ecosystems. We can, make the world a better place for everyone. And it's totally within our means to do so. It's just our willingness to do so. So I think, we advocate for a Green New Deal, which is just basically a series of legislation that would allow us to tackle the climate crisis from all these different aspects. And it's really exciting and hopeful and full of, dreams for a better world. That's why I'm in it.
Yes, thank you, Hope. With all that in her heart, Hope was one of the people who created Sunrise Movement Dallas, the Dallas sort of hub or chapter of the Sunrise Movement, which I've very happily been a part of for several years now. And some of the things we've done in the past, we take several different avenues of advocating for change. Sometimes that's local city politics or state politics, pushing for policy. Sometimes that's, we do community building. We have a movement house where several of us live, and we use that as a meeting space for our org and other orgs. We host like community building events there. We have like gardens, native gardens and of produce, and we will help with mutual aid when disaster comes up, things like that, several things. One thing that we're doing right now that we have a lot of focus on is a public transit campaign, working on getting free DART access for students K through 12, which is something that exists in several other cities, but not in Dallas. And this fits with that vision because one, increased public transit reduces the need for car dependence, which lowers carbon emissions, and two, public transit, making it more available is an equitable solution because it helps people who otherwise might not have the access to opportunities to get places they need to be and be able to get around.
Yeah, and you can get involved. Right now we're in the process of emailing DART board members and city councilmen to encourage them to sign a pledge to create this pilot program that would allow students K through 12 to ride DART for free. And so there should be a link coming to you soon through the newsletter, I believe, where you can copy and paste an email and send it off and be like, We want free DART for students. Yeah.
And it's achievable. Several DART board members and council members are on board with this. We're in contact with them. The campaign's been going really well, so we're hoping to push it over the edge. We'll also, if you want to right away, if you find us on Instagram, our Instagram is Sunrise Movement Dallas. The link in our bio, you can get access to all that and find more ways to get plugged in. And we're also really excited to be coming back on the 26th for the service to talk to you guys a bit more in depth about climate change and climate solutions during the service. And we're also going to give a presentation on a year of direct action that we took pushing for federal policy. And this was civil disobedience and protests and stuff. It included a lot. It included a 400-mile march from New Orleans to Houston along the Gulf South. It included hunger strikes. It included sit-ins, which ended up with both of us in jail. So many fun tales to tell. So you'll want to come hear about all of that. So I really hope that I look forward to seeing y'all again and hope that we can talk with you guys some more about that. And we're so grateful to be the Share the Plate partners this month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nathan and Hope. I thank you, my children thank you, my grandchildren thank you. And now the offering will be joyfully given and received.
Our first reading this morning comes from the writings of Kay Montgomery. This is about February. She writes, "February is not for the faint-hearted, I think. It is so exceedingly ordinary, having neither the romance of spring nor the bravado of winter. And the ordinary is tough, it seems to me, demanding as it does not only endurance, but imagination. We gather on this late winter morning in a village of faith, warmed by those who join us, saying to one another by our presence here that together we find comfort and even hope in the gray days of February, in the dailiness of our lives. We have noted the light of the late afternoons and the odd and out of sequence melting day. Here ends the reading. We come now to the time in our worship service that we set aside for meditation and prayer. We'll have a time of shared silence, hear the joys and sorrows of our community, share in a meditation this morning, and join in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life. I invite you to join me now in a time of silence. This morning we share in sorrow with Anita Thurmond, whose best friend Mary Sue passed yesterday after 70 years of friendship. We share too in sorrow with Eileen Terrell, who broke her wrist this week. Eileen is doing okay, though. She is doing well. We hold these sorrows in our heart, as well as all the joys and sorrows and all in between that we know only in silence. The words of our meditation this morning come from the writings of the Reverend Julia Hamilton. In the pagan tradition, which is grounded in a respect and reverence for the natural world, calling upon the four directions is the usual way to begin any ceremony. Each direction is associated with an element of the natural world and represents some part of our human nature as well. The directions are not seen as separate and isolated, but rather as part of the interdependent system that makes up the world. So here on our altar, we have the symbolic elements for each direction, and we'll travel through the meanings associated with each. We begin in the east, toward the rising sun. The element of the east is air, represented on our altar by a feather. Air and breath give us life. It is the direction of inspiration, the word that literally means to take in air. The east is associated with the mind, with knowledge and learning and intellectual curiosity. Imagine the birds turning and wheeling in the air. Imagine the breeze blowing through your hair. Turning toward the east, we look for a fresh start, an invigorating breath, a new idea. When you are feeling stuck in a rut, beholden to a routine, or if the wind has gone out of your sails, look eastward. We move around the wheel to the south. The element of the south is fire, and in the southern place, the flame of our chalice burns bright. Fire is a transformative force. It is heat and light and powerful change. In the northern hemisphere, it makes sense that we associate the south towards the equator with the warmth of the sun and the heat of flame. We see birds move south, butterflies move south, whales move south, seeking warmer places when the weather gets cold. When our internal weather gets cold, turning south is a metaphor for turning toward warmth and daylight, seeking out the changes that will warm us up, get our blood moving, call us out of our winters, out of hibernation and into action. We arrive now in the west. The element of the west is water, and we have water here. We add to this water every year, symbolizing the way we come together in our community as individual drops might join into a mighty river. In the West, we are drawn into the experience of our emotions. It is a direction that calls us to self-reflection and self-understanding. Our emotions move in us like water, flowing through our lives, sometimes calm and sometimes turbulent, but always flowing. When we dam up our feelings, just like when we dam up a river, the pressure builds until it finds an outlet. If you are seeking to get in touch with your inner life, with your emotions, turn towards the west. We move now to north. The element of the north is earth, represented by some dirt. There's stability here, the ground of our being. The north represents the place that holds us, that allows us time and space to heal and grow, to feel nurtured and respected. It is also the place of embodiment, of connecting with your physical self, with the concrete and tangible world around us. The north calls to you if you are seeking balance, the deep wisdom that lives in your bones, a place of rest and recovery. So we have moved through these 4 directions, given them shape and meaning. East, air, breath and inspiration. South, fire, transformation and action. West, water, feeling and reflection. And north, earth, balance and wisdom. During the rest of our time together this morning, I invite you to reflect on whichever direction or piece of wisdom you are most in need of during this time of transformation on the precipice of spring. May it be so. I invite us to join now in singing our responsive hymn, Spirit of Life.
Our second reading comes from Samuel Felderman, a poem called In Bulk. So the skies rumbled and the snows came, and everywhere down through the centuries of this gray night came women gathering to pray and to sink their hands into the dark earth. They gathered seeds and prepared them for planting. They meditated in the icy darkness, and they celebrated the lambing of the first ewe to hasten spring. And when through the earth they felt the stirring, they sang songs encouraging the tiny seeds to grow in the dark, wet soil. You can smell their work still. They are digging beside us. Listen. The north wind carries their song across the snow this Imbolc night. as the earth prepares for spring. Wise women gather in circles to await the promise of new life and to sing praises for the green earth. And so do we here now, this year, and every year. So ends the reading.
So one day in mid-July last year, as a part of my pilgrimage trip to the island of Iona, I found myself hiking up a mountain called Dunny to get to a wellspring of water known for centuries as the Well of Eternal Youth. The legend goes that in the beginning of February, the hag of winter would journey to this well and she would sip from it. And she was then, with the water from the well, transformed into the beautiful goddess of spring and would raise her hands over the islands, turning them green and scattering snowdrops from her cloak. There is said to be a connection between Brigid, both the goddess and the saint, to the Isle of Iona, though the detail of that connection seems to be lost to the sands of time. On our actual hike up this hill, the green grass was muddy from rains the day before, and we all had to help each other to keep from slipping. The way was winding, and we got lots of side eyes from sheep who did not appreciate our presence in their home. And when we reached the pool, I realized that had I seen it in any other time and place, I wouldn't have given it much thought. It was small and ordinary looking, and yet that made it all the more special to participate in this ritual that people have partaken in for generations, to suspend all of my disbelief and just dive in. So when it came time for our ritual, when it came time for me to dip my hands in that water, I thought about this goddess, anchored both in the ancient traditions of this place and in the Christianity that would come later. And I wondered, what is it I want to leave here in this pool that people have come to for hundreds of years? What in me needs to be healed? And what do I want to bring into the world? Imbolc, the holiday that we are acknowledging and honoring today, is the third holiday in the Wheel of the Year. Typically celebrated on February 1st, Imbolc has ancient Celtic roots and is closely associated with the goddess Brigid. It marks the halfway point between the winter solstice and the vernal equinox. Many modern-day celebrations, including the Catholic celebration of Candlemas and the less religious Groundhog Day, have sprung out of the ancient traditions at Imbolc. Imbolc is a Gaelic word that means in the belly. The celebration of Imbolc dates back to the pre-Christian era in the British Isles. The earliest mentions of it in Irish literature were found in the 10th century, and poetry from that time relates the holiday to ewe's milk with the implication of purification. It's been speculated that this ritual stems from the breeding cycle of sheep and the beginning of lactation. The holiday was traditionally aligned with the first day of spring and really with the idea of rebirth. Earth-centered holidays like this are at once ancient and new. Of course, we know that hundreds of years ago, societies were dependent on food they grew themselves, and thus the seasons of the earth and the cycles of the sun and moon, even if we may not really be able to fathom what that was like. Today, as we learn about and honor the ancient ways, we do so in part to express care for the earth and its rhythms and patterns that may still be such a mystery to us, even as they guide our lives. Imbolc, as we've said, is most closely associated with Brigid, and some say that Brigid was a woman, and others believe she was a goddess, and still others a saint. The passage of time and our human creativity mean that there are many different stories about her and who she was and is, and the truth is that she lives in between. In any case, whether saint, goddess, human, or something else, Bridget is associated with learning, healing, anything to do with swords and fire, fertility, and sacred wells. And what's unique about Bridget in comparison with other Celtic gods and goddesses is that devotion to her and worship of her was widespread amongst Irish Celtic people instead of just localized in one place. So every year at midwinter, festivals were thrown in honor of the goddess as a way to encourage the return of springtime. John Philip Newell, a prominent writer on Celtic spirituality, uses Bridget as a lens to talk about thresholds. He says Bridget rests on the threshold between the Christian and the pre-Christian. And he tells a story, an old Hebridean legend, that talks about Bridget being the barmaid at the inn in Bethlehem. And in the story he shares, he says that she shared her last cup of water and bit of bread with this family that came in, the woman young and pregnant, the man older. And she shared even though in the land at that time there was famine and food was scarce. She wasn't able to welcome them into the inn, but after the couple left, she noticed that her cup was full again and her loaf of bread had been replenished. So she stood at the kitchen sink, cleaning up, and thinking about this strange occurrence when she noticed a light on in the barn, and she goes out to investigate. And there she finds the woman, Mary, in labor, and midwifed Jesus into the world, holding him to her chest. So in the Celtic tradition, there's room for a lot of imagination around times, dates, people being in more than one place at once. That's not a problem here. So as Newell reminds us, this legend points to the way Bridget midwifed the birth of Christianity into Ireland, as they say. But it is also important to note that the birthing of this devotion didn't mean abandoning of the wisdom that came before. One thing that's always fascinated me about Catholicism is that there seems to be a ritual and a saint for everything. So we know, and we know too, that many of the ancient pagan customs were absorbed and made a part of Christianity. The Reverend Julie Conradi writes, "For all the flaws of the Catholic Church, they honor the feminine in ways that Protestants are just now realizing. We UUs, who are not cemented to the gender binary, value personal characteristics of all people. But as we work out of that mindset of patriarchy, we have to consciously remember to value those characteristics traditionally deemed feminine, and remember that feminine characteristics are not weak or less than." Much of Bridget's legacy, be she a goddess or saint or something in between, has to do with her community of women. The legend goes that Bridget wanted to start a community dedicated to praying and to doing good work. And so one day she went to a king and said, "Give me the land to build this community." And he refused, saying, "No, this land is mine. I am keeping it for myself." But Bridget and her sisters prayed for the king to change his mind. She asked again and said, "Just give me as much land as my cloak will cover." And the king agreed, laughing, thinking that's not a whole lot. But Bridget's sisters took the cloak and stretched it out in all different directions, north and south and east and west. And the cloak grew and spread over the whole community, over all of the land. The king realized that there was something special about this woman and gave her the land to build her community. So it is said that we gather under Bridget's cloak of healing and of wonder. Saint Bridget is credited with creating the first cloistered community of nuns in Ireland at her monastery, which became known as Kildare, meaning Church of the Oaks, a reference to the Druids as oak knowers, bearers of oak wisdom. and an acknowledgement that this way of knowing was not left behind. It is said that the monastery was built on the site of an eternal flame, which communities of women from pre-Christian time had tended since before the time of Jesus. This flame was extinguished violently at the hands of Protestant reformers in the 16th century, and yet Newell writes of a parallel spiritual practice that either arose or was revived from older times of keeping this hearth fire burning in a home for generations and generations, tended always by the women. Bridget, too, is referred to as bride in Scotland, the Hebrides, the islands on the western coast of Scotland, Bride's Islands, and I've heard her even referred to there as the Bride of Spring. She is thought to have had a special connection to Iona, and in the 13th century Benedictine monastery that still stands and functions as a worship space there, the stained glass features St. Columba, St. Patrick, and St. Bridget. This ancient poem about Bridget notes her influence on the coming of spring. The serpent will come from the hole on the brown day of bride, though there should be 3 feet of snow on the flat surface of the ground. The idea remains that the goddess Bridget could somehow bring about the coming of spring even in a place that still seemed completely wintered, and that worshiping her would make her likely to use her magical powers of healing and renewal for the earth. Newell's central thesis in his book, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, is this. In the Celtic tradition, it was said that we humans suffer from something called soul forgetfulness. We have forgotten who we are and fallen out of true relationship with the earth and with one another. Newell's work is about bringing us back into relationship by reminding us of different ways of knowing that have existed throughout the centuries. Maybe in all the years since the time that most folks marked their lives by the seasons and the harvests, all the things that have changed in our lives have caused this fallout of relationship. And on the cusp of spring, emerging from cold and ice and rain to find daffodils sprouting around us, there is no better time to wonder about what that relationship is, and about how it might be restored. In the words of Reverend Julie Conradi again, we celebrate Bridget today not because spring is here, but because we are calling forth spring to come, because Bridget embodies hope for tomorrow. As Kay Montgomery reminded us in the reading we heard earlier, February is not for the faint of heart, and neither really is hope. In thinking about relationship, I go always to ancestors, to the passage of time and the knowing that is passed down from those who have come before. And though it's hard to even fathom, I try to put myself in the shoes of someone who might have lived many hundreds of years ago in a place like Ireland or on an island like Iona. In the winter that is so long and so filled with wind and rain and cold that you become isolated. You become chilled down where the spirit meets the bone. Rest at this time would have been incredibly important because few hours of daylight mean fewer hours for work. When food had to be stored for the winter, it would have been important not to work too hard because there was not as much food to go around. You couldn't expend a lot of energy. For all these reasons, slowing down was part of how people survived. And this natural rhythm is something we've fallen out of, something our society doesn't easily allow us to do any longer. As I put myself back in the shoes of some ancient ancestor, in the cold and windy wet of winter, I'm thinking about finding yourself praying, celebrating, making fires, and gathering with friends in honor of this golden-haired goddess, so that she might help bring new life into the world again, into your worlds. so that once again there will be sheep and green grass and sun that shines until late in the day, even though that feels far away right now. That kind of hope is not for the faint of heart, and it does not come easily. New life takes effort to be born. It takes someone helping it get there. As you use, so much of our religious tradition can center on creating a better world, on being the change. And I think that's a good and holy and necessary message for us to receive, and really for the world to receive from us. But a lot of change isn't the change we plan. It is change that happens to us, whether we realize it or not. In the words of the Reverend Kristen Schmidt, there are times in our world when we aren't the ones doing the transforming, but instead the ones being transformed. She continues, in a faith so focused on our responsibility, our agency, our moral obligation, I hope we remember that none of us is individually responsible when things in the world don't get better. I hope we can all rest in that. There are seasons when, even though trouble seems to wait at every turn, it's okay for us to unclench, to rest, and to trust in the forces beyond us at work in the world. And in the pagan traditions, this force comes to us through the wheel of the year, a beautiful name for the turning of the seasons. The comfort and joy I personally take from the pagan tradition is the idea that we are always being changed in time with the earth, whether we know it or not. We are being turned, whether we know it or not. We are all a small part in this great turning. And somehow the new life is always being created, little by little, even in ice storms and in days and days of rain. Daffodils begin to bloom. Somehow underground, they continue to be born, despite what lies on the surface of the earth. New life is to be found in the belly. We and the earth are always in relationship. I heard someone say recently that transformation does not happen in isolation, and it turns out really that nothing does. So what will we allow to be born in us this spring? What seeds of hope, of justice, of love do we want to sow? And how can we remember that we don't do any of this alone? So let us remember and go back to the imagery of that well up in the muddy green hills and consider what in us needs healing. What might we need to let die in the cold of winter? And what newness might take root in us in this great turning? May it be so. Amen. I invite us to rise, either in body or in spirit, and join in singing our closing hymn. It's going to be a familiar tune. It's number 34, but we have new lyrics here on the screen, especially for this holiday.
we extinguish this flame, but not our commitment to our mission to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. This we do because we envision a beloved community filled with compassion, helping all to thrive in a just world.
I invite you now to join hands as you're comfortable. My prayer for each of you this morning is to wonder how you are being transformed without even realizing it. And may the transformation be beautiful. Go in peace.